Hello, welcome to Take Refuge 3D. Welcome back everybody, and if you're new here then welcome. Now today we're going to dive into why plasticity might just be your new secret weapon for making hard surface game ready assets. In this video we're taking an in-depth look into making a game ready asset using plasticity, which we'll use to make a high and low poly model, and then we'll cover optimizing both of those in Blender, and finally baking our maps for the low poly from the high poly for a game ready asset. We'll focus on why this is a perfect fit for creating manufactured hard surface props for games. Whether you're working on sci-fi environments, sleek modern worlds, or something else entirely, plasticity's precision and streamlined workflow will make it an ideal choice for these kinds of props. We will start off by creating a base mesh and creating our key primary shapes and defining our silhouette. This is important and also quite satisfying in my opinion, but not quite as satisfying as the next step, which is adding all of our high poly details that we will bake into the base mesh that we made. Before we jump in, there's three key considerations that will shape how you approach game asset creation. Okay, so these are not strictly plasticity, but questions you should ask yourself before you start. First of all, what kind of game are you making? Are you working on a low poly indie title or a high fidelity AAA game? Knowing this helps inform how you approach the modeling. Sometimes a simple cube with textures slapped on will do the job. Other times you're going to add more details. Secondly, what is the asset's role? Will the prop be seen up close, perhaps as a hero asset, or is this a background prop? This is going to affect how much time you invest in its overall silhouette, curvature, and complexity. Third of all, design and reference. Are you designing this asset from scratch yourself out of your mind, or are you replicating something that already exists? Either way, gathering strong references up front is crucial to streamline your creative process. If you are designing something from scratch, you may need to either draw or 3D model a concept piece before you tackle the actual problem solving part of making it game ready. This will add extra time to your process, so consider if you can exclude that by collecting reference from the real world, or do you need to make your own reference? So we'll explore through the video how asking these questions early on can save you hours later on, and how plasticity gives you the flexibility to balance detail, efficiency, and creativity based on your answers to those considerations. Now with plasticity there are some caveats. So plasticity is a CAD software, which is different to polygon software, which is traditionally used for making 3D game assets. The benefits of plasticity is that it's incredibly fast and intuitive, but there are some key nuances to keep in mind, especially when making game assets. So first of all, it's a destructive workflow. Plasticity is mostly destructive. While certain edits like moving faces around or tweaking fillets can be done after the fact, there's little to no proceduralism. Many actions like booleans and cuts are permanent, so it's essential to plan ahead and stay flexible in the early stages to avoid backtracking. Adding a lot of fillets and patches in the early stages can break your ability to make larger edits later on, so it's worthwhile keeping things simple for as long as possible. This is actually best practice, whatever software you're using, as many of these generalized rules apply to other 3D workflows as well. Like in ZBrush, for example, you want to keep your model as simple as possible before you add details. And this leads to our second caveat, micro-filleting. Micro-filleting, or the act of adding tiny bevels and fillets to your model, might make your model look amazing in plasticity, but in the context of game assets, it can skyrocket the poly count, sometimes adding tens of thousands of polygons unnecessarily. So unless the asset is a hero prop designed to be seen up close and you need that curvature, it's better to skip micro-filleting and instead fake those details with normal maps, bevel shaders, and smart texture painting later on in your final game ready model. And that brings me to my next point. This isn't a caveat, but more of a misunderstanding that I've seen a lot. So a common misconception as I hear that I've heard a lot on my channel and other channels is that plasticity creates bad topology. Now the truth is that it doesn't. Plasticity, when exported, generates topology that's meant to be reworked or optimized, just like any other workflow. Think about it like this. You're not going to go into ZBrush, make a billion polygon sculpt, and then move that straight into a game engine. You're going to optimize it. And you wouldn't take a raw Blender model without cleaning it up first. The same applies to plasticity. Plasticity's job is to give you precise, clean shapes quickly, and it's up to you to re-topologize and optimize for your specific needs, and keep that in mind when modeling. Whether it's for games, films, or real-time applications, you're going to need to keep these in mind. But if it's just for a render, it probably doesn't matter too much. Okay, so plasticity is not going to create a pure quad topology like subdivision surface modeling does. And if that's what you're looking for, you should check out my CAD to quads video, as we won't be going into that workflow here, but I have covered it on this channel before. And if you like this content, don't hesitate to sub, like, and ring that bell. And if you like plasticity like I do, you can use the coupon code REFUGE10 to get a 10% discount off any plasticity license. And just quickly before we start, I want to shout out my buddy Matt at the channel Learn Everything About Design. He's a professional 3D educator with a great YouTube channel. He makes content for plasticity and other CAD programs on topics like 3D printing, reverse engineering machine parts, and much, much more. I'll link his channel down below. It's worth a look if you're interested in those kind of topics. He's also a plasticity affiliate. Okay, so let's get into it. So what you can see on screen is this fire hydrant that I made with plasticity. Now this is my sort of reference that I made for myself. Okay, I'm going to keep it off screen as a reference. We won't make this exactly, but we'll make something very similar. And just looking at this, you can see that it's got a lot of details, and this is the high poly. If we bring our hierarchy down, I also made a low poly. Okay, so we'll hide the high poly, and you can see we've got a low poly there as well. So let's crack into it. I'm just going to start a new file. Okay, clear the scene, and we'll bring our grid up, and we're just going to delete this directly. Okay, so I've got my screencast keys on down here, so you can follow along. I'm not going to necessarily explain every keystroke that I do, but I will try to. If you see me using a radial menu, okay, radial menus are something that you can use in plasticity. There's a page on the plasticity website on how to set them up, and this one in particular I made with the radial menu builder, which is something that I made for plasticity, and there'll be a link in the description for that as well if you don't want to write your own JSON files to get the radial menus. But we'll try and work from here, from the toolbar. You might be able to bring it to the left and the right, and I'm using the current version of plasticity 25.1.8, so the 2025 version. So if your UI looks different, you are probably using an earlier version of plasticity. So to start our model, we're going to start with a regular polygon over here. I've got screencast keys on down the bottom so you can follow along. Okay, and we're going to give it 8 sides, so you can just hold down shift and scroll your wheel, and you'll change the amount of sides on the polygon. Okay, and you can see the number in the middle is the width, so I'm going to make this 0.75, so 75 centimeters. Okay, because I am working in centimeters or meters actually. Okay, and then we're going to right click to accept that, and we're going to go up to here, or you can press 3 to change into face mode, and we're just going to bring this up a bit. And as I mentioned earlier on, what we're doing here is making the low poly model. Okay, so the low poly model's main purpose is to have the least amount of geometry you can get away with while maintaining a silhouette in the 3D environment that would be recognizable from a distance. And you know, your definition of what you need to do with this and how much detail you need to add will be informed by what type of game you're making. So in this case, we're going to go for a sort of a medium poly asset that you might see in a modern console title, for example. So I'm just going to use this little circle here to give this a little bit of a angle, okay? Because all these little subtle nuanced details, people don't necessarily notice them, but they give an overall look. So we've got this coming up like that. So it's wider at the bottom than it is there. Okay, and then we're just going to grab a center circle and we're going to lock it to the center face here. And we're just going to give this about that, okay? And we're just really trying to define our shape here. So the height of this fire hydrant, okay, could be something like that. And I think I want to take these edges here and just duplicate them. So we've got another face, Shift D, and I'm going to press G and G again to move this around in screen space. And I'm going to hold down Control to lock it to the center face up there. And now we can just scale that down a wee bit. Okay. And we're going to pull this up like so. So we've got this faceted kind of face here. Okay, and I'm just going to quickly Control R to do an ISO param, okay, and we're going to hit Tab to bring this across here, okay. We're going to select this face and we're just going to bring that out a little bit, okay. We're not going to do the same at the bottom, but just at the top. Now, if we go into front mode, okay, and if you go over to here on the right hand side and go to shader mode, there's some inbuilt matte caps. And this black one is very good for showing us our silhouette. You can press Alt-Shift-Z to turn off your grid and you get a really nice silhouette so you can see what you're building up here. Now we'll go back into our modeling matte cap and we'll see what we can do with our overall silhouette. So really what we want to do next is create the top part of the fire hydrant, okay? And when we make our circle, make sure that this black dot is in line with our x-axis, this red line, okay? And we want this to be about there, okay? And then if we press 1, we'll see that that red dot is linked to our, right? So that dot's lined up with our x-axis anyway, so we can now Shift D and bring it up. And now when we go into front mode, and we want to maybe just scale this down a little bit more, take our control point curve, okay, and then we can just link that to that dot there, and when they're connected they're red, and when they're not connected they're pink, okay. And now we can just work with this curvature a little bit to give it a little bit more shape. So just this dot here, okay. Now pressing 2 again, we can now select this, okay, and now we can either go down here to this suggested commands menu, or you can actually bring that up by pressing Shift and F, and we're going to choose revolve, okay. And then we can choose the center of the circle and just pull up, and that will revolve around that like that. Looking this at the front, I think that's a little bit fat, so I want to go into sheet and solid mode, and I'm going to press S and I'm going to press Shift Z to constrain that to the Z axis, okay. And we're just going to try and get this shape to look a little bit more like the top of a fire hydrant, okay. And we can just select this curves here, and that will select all of our curves, and we can now just hide all of our curves. So I think that looks great, but we've got this one line here, so if we select it and press X, we can delete that line. So what we can do now is we can do an ISO param by pressing Control R and Tab, right? And we can lock that to there, and we can just make a whole bunch of these across there, but we only really want one of them, okay. And they're sort of, as you can see, different sizes, right? And that's why we only want one of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this one and press Shift D to duplicate it, Control F again once we've got this selected, Control F, it's Shift F, isn't it? Yeah, Shift F to thicken, and we're going to bring that out, okay. Now we've got all of these lines on that, which we don't really want because we only just wanted that to create that piece of geometry. Okay, so we're going to click on this and we're going to go F and we're going to type in RED for delete redundant topology and get rid of all of those extra lines. Okay, so far so good, but this obviously we want to go around a bit, and I also think it's a little bit fat, so I'm going to select these two edges if I can. Yep, these two faces rather, and we're going to make that a little bit more narrow. And actually I don't like this, so I don't like the fact that it's tapered like that, and that was a nuance of me creating it that way. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do that. I'm going to duplicate this curve here, okay, and I'm just going to have that one curve, and I'm going to press P, and I'm going to make the vertex count 4, right? And we need to change the angle to 45, okay, and then we can make it a little bit bigger. We can make it a little bit bigger like that, and then we've got that perfect it's consistent in its shape around the way. So then I can make that a little bit narrower. All right, like so. Then I'm going to actually search for patch, which I've got set to Alt F, and just patch this whole object so it's no longer a sheet. And now we can radial array this around like so. And then before we confirm it, we just want to hold down Shift and scroll the wheel to see how many we've got. So from the front, I want that to be, I think that was good with that one at the front there, because that means if we're in front mode and we need to mirror this later on, it's going to mirror down the center. If we have it like that, it might start to get a bit wonky. So that is symmetrical, which is what we want. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Oh, let's do that one more time. I forgot to confirm that. And making sure we got that symmetry, pressing right click or enter to OK that. And we'll keep these separate for now, just in case we want to make edits later on, but we will add them into the overall model later on. Now I'm going to take this face, I'm going to extrude it up, okay? And we're going to extrude it out like so. And then we're just going to offset it by pressing O and extrude it up, okay, and offset it again by pressing O and extrude it up one more time. Okay, so now let's look at our silhouette with the black matte cap. We can turn our grid off. Okay, we're starting to get more of a fire hydrant-y shape. I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that it lacks curvature at this point, apart from this main curve, because a lot of those details will be baked in and be driven by lighting in the game engine. So it's a little bit of a trust the process. I mean, we could go in here now and we could fillet everything and it could start to look really cool, and then we look at our curvature and we go, that looks more realistic. But ultimately, we don't want that in plasticity for these smaller bevels, okay? And you'll see why later. Now, that being said, I actually do want these ones to be a bit fatter, so let's quickly do that. So we can delete all of these, okay? And when I look at this, I'm going to select both sides and I'm just going to widen that out, and we can radial array it one more time. Going into front mode and ensuring it's symmetrical. Wonderful. All right, so we got all of our objects there. Okay, so the next thing is we want the actual hydrant part of the hydrant on here. Okay, so let's work on that. So what we can do first is we can come and grab a circle, okay, and we just put it in the center face here and bring it out, and it's going to be kind of sitting on the face there. So let's get the shape and proportion of this right before we do anything. So what I want from this is I want it to come out a little way, maybe a little bit just over the lip of this, okay? And I don't want it to be quite so big. I want it to be proportionate. Actually, let's bring this ever so slightly down in size. And you can see that it's not connecting there. And what we want to do is just quickly check with the radial array, because I want this to be on 4 sides, or possibly even 3. That could work. I think 3 sides works. Okay. And we just want to see if that's the right kind of size. So I think it is, but what I want from the shape is the curvature to start like that. You can hold down shift just to have a little bit more precision. And then I just want to extrude this face out so it's a flat face. We can pull that out a bit further and we can do an isoparam on this face. Okay. And we want this sort of to have its own curvature. Okay. So I'm not sure how we're going to, what's going to be geometry or what's going to be baked in yet, but we'll just keep it as this for now. Okay. And because it's a mid poly, we can actually add a little bit of extra detail, okay, because we might be seeing this close up. So we want this sort of hose attachment part to work, okay, and we can give that a chamfer, okay, not a fillet, but a chamfer, like that. And then that gives a little bit of, if we look at it from the side view, we've got a little bit of extra detail there, okay. And what we want to do now is connect this object to this object. Okay, so what we can do is we can start to offset this back face, and then we just click the face of the cylinder and it will attach itself like that. Okay, so that is quite a lot of space that it's taking up, so maybe we'll just have it two-sided and we can look at it from side view. And as we rotate around, we can see that that does start to look a lot like a fire hydrant. So that being said, we can select these two objects, holding down shift to add to your selection. And we can Q, and then select this final object, and they're going to be connected here. Okay. And this actually gives us a little bit of room to do something with the front side. So it's not a bad thing. So depending on your modeling, you may want to add a larger fillet here, but I'm not going to bother because I'm going to let the texturing software deal with that later. So I think that our low poly's nearly done. I just want to have a look at some little details to see if there's anything we could do to add to the overall silhouette. Like I said, that's going to give it a little bit more oomph when you see this from a distance, okay? Because seeing it up close is one thing, seeing it from a distance is another. So I think that looks like a good fire hydrant. I feel like it could be a little bit taller though. So what we might do is go into face mode, okay? And if we drag our marquee right to left, we're going to select all of the faces that are encompassed within that marquee, okay? And we can press G and then just grab this as Z and we can bring it down a little bit. Now we can look at our silhouette. Okay. And I think that might be a little bit more what we're looking for, especially looking at it at a side angle like that. Looks like a little Lego man. Okay. So just turning our X-ray vision off. And I think one other thing that I want to do for the silhouette is actually maybe something like that. Okay, and then we can and fingers crossed when we mirror this across. Perfect. Okay, so let's look at that again. Yeah, I like that. That just gives it a little bit more detail and it's not going to cost that many extra polygons. Okay, so you'll see that when we export this, that this won't really overall affect the amount of polygons. Maybe a little bit, but not much. Okay, so this is our low poly, guys, and it looks very basic now. It doesn't look fancy or anything. If we stick other shaders on, it's not going to look like super cool or fancy or anything like that. And most of what we're doing in Plasticity isn't going to. But this is the fun part where we get to add the high poly details. So what I want to do now quickly is I just want to actually join all of these together by Boolean, pressing Q twice, right clicking, and it's saying the Boolean failed. So let's just try doing it bit by bit. Okay, QQ, that worked. QQ, this is the one that's failing. So I don't know, it must be this part here that we need to bring up a little bit. Okay. And that worked. Okay, and it should connect to this one all right. QQ. And we'll select the bottom as well. So this is all one object now. And we can just call this hydrant underscore low to start with. Okay, and we're going to put this into a group, Control G, and we're going to call this low poly. Okay. Now, this is actually probably one more thing that I'd want to add to this is some nuts and bolts. Okay, so I think some bolts coming up out of the model would be great. We'll keep those as separate objects as well. So let's just create a regular polygon somewhere like here. We'll bring down the sides to, I think 6 would be the minimum, and we can just add that like that. We can select this as the temporary plane, this face here, by pressing Shift and Spacebar, and you see we've got a temporary plane. So if we turn our, you can see that it's centered there, and then we can circular array this around here, and I think that looks quite nice. Okay, and the fewer you do, the lower your poly count's going to be. So what you really want to do here, considering what you want to do, is the least amount of bolts without it looking like too sparse. So 3 could work. 4 kind of looks wonky, but I think 5 is the right amount, because at every angle you can see, you know, in that silhouette, when we turn that on, you can see a little bit of some bolts in the overall silhouette. Okay, so now I want to mirror this up here. Oh, and I didn't think about that. So we'll just select these whole objects and we will G and bring them up to there. I want to scale them in a little bit as well. And actually they're a bit big up there. So what I want to do is I want to Control Shift C, choose this object, Control Shift C for copy with placement, and then we can go Control Shift V, put that up there, make it a bit smaller, bring it down like that, and then we can press Escape. We can bring this down, and then we can do our radial array on that object. So, and it's coming out somewhat on the edges, so that's not perfectly aligned. So let's do it like that. Yeah, okay. Enter, and then we can use this face here as a temporary plane. Select these 4 and mirror it to the top. Okay, and our silhouette has got more to it now. Yeah, okay, so that's great. Okay, so we want to just give all of these the name. So what you can do is you can select all of these solids here, plus the ones down here, and you can hold down Shift and double click one of these, and we can call these bolts. Okay, and then we get these all named bolts. And what we can do is select everything in solid mode, Shift D to duplicate, and then we can Control G and move this to a group called high poly, and then we can turn our low poly one off, and we've got our high poly models here. So this is where we can start to add details. So here we are, we've established our core silhouette, which is important when we're considering what high poly details that we want to add. So the high poly, the details can stray from the silhouette that we already have, but not by too much. So what we're working here is what we're wanting to add is normal, ambient occlusion, and cavity detail. Let's add some cavity detail into the shine. So we can just grab a simple line and just drag it up on the Z-axis like that. And we can pipe it, make the pipe a little bit fatter. Okay, and just making sure that we're still working on our high poly. And then we can radial array this around. Okay, holding down shift to increase the radial array. And I think that looks great. Okay, from the front, from the side, and we can right click to accept that. And from the side, actually I want that to be a little bit more symmetrical. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to radial array it, and I want it to be symmetrical from the side, like that. And I'm going to remove these three, sorry. And then by pressing Control 3, I can go to the other side and remove these three, and just press deselecting the main object and just press to delete that. And let's create something a little bit different for the front and back. Let's create something like a little bit of a sci-fi detail. This is where we can have a bit of fun, right? So going into the side view, we can create a line going up to here, and we can press Alt Z to go into X-ray mode to see where our line's actually going. And we can just hold, if you come down here to this Z axis, we can hit shift on one of these lines to create a line and lock it to that. So now we've got this bizarre shape, and we can mirror that across. Okay, go into edge mode, select these two and join them together, and then we can press G, turning off our temporary plane actually, and that actually came to a funny place. So let's try and center it and bring it up, and we can just shift I that onto there. And let's see if we can mirror this across. Okay, so we've got both of those sides, so we can bring these in or possibly out. I don't know. Let's bring them in a little bit. Okay, and then selecting for solid mode and pressing Q for booleans, making sure we're not booleaning anything else out on the other side. And that's created a bit of extra geometry that we don't really want. So we want to ensure that all of these are perfectly flush. So we can G, press period to isolate the objects, select all of the things on the base. So I went into face mode and did a left to right selection just to include those faces. And then let's see if we can move these down and use this as the correct face. And then now Q and W, Q and W, and that didn't create extra geometry this time. So now we've got this cavity which will be baked in later on. Now I think if we just give this some curvature, remember it's a high poly detail, so we don't really need to worry about poly count with these edits. We only need to worry about we're not destroying the silhouette of the object, which we're not at this stage. Okay, so I think that looks great. We could possibly try and make this taller, it's going to behave strangely. So we'll go into side mode, X-ray mode, select all of those and press G and up. And maybe we can even scale them. No, it's going to be a bit funny, but did it work on both sides? Okay, I think that looks a bit nicer, don't you? Okay, so next, let's continue adding some details. Okay, so with these, I want to perhaps add a line starting at the center. Okay, we can pipe that, change it to a vertex count of 4 again, and change the angle to, not 45, 4, and then change the angle by 45 degrees. So we've got that nicely on the edge there. Okay, I'm gonna hit this edge, take an edge and press Alt and Control to select all the 4 edges. Okay, I'm just going to scale that up a little bit, and I'm going to rotate it around there like that, and we can give it some something like that. We can mirror those all across the object, and then we can boolean those out. Now this will affect the silhouette a little bit, but I'm not too worried because this is more about cavity detail. So select our main object. Okay. And it seems a bit off kilter. Why is that? Why is that one like that? Let's go take a step back. And did we, if we rotated that around the center, that's right. So when we mirror it across, I must have not rotated it around correctly. Okay. Alright, so there we've got some extra details in there. And I think that is going to look quite nice on the bake. Let's add some more, I don't know, let's add like a nice cut across. Okay, so we can go into X-ray mode again, and we can just bring this down like so, lock that to the middle, mirror that across. Okay, and select these 2 and hit J. And now we've got 1. And now we can just press C and cut that through the middle. And if we go like this, you can see how the cut's going. Okay. We can hide that curve. We can bring that in like so. Or we could bring it out a little bit. Up to you. I actually think out looks better in this case. Okay. And then, mimicking that, we could take a line, go into X-ray mode, okay, bring it from here, go to this line here and press Shift, so we're locking onto that line, to the center. Actually, bring the line, we'll take that center line there, and then we'll start going across like this, and then we're going to take this line, right? So we're going to take this line like that, so we're getting that angle. Okay, and then what we can do is we can mirror this across, and we go into X-ray, we can join those, and then we can make this a temporary plane. Okay, you can see what's happening. Let's just bring this out so it's easier to see. Okay, and we can mirror that down the way, and that's gone down way too far, but never mind, we'll bring it back up. Okay, we can take a line and we can join this to this, and we can join this to this, and we can select all of them. We can, oh, this one's not quite connected, so we go into 1 mode, oh, 1, and we can G, hold down Control, and lock it to that curve. Okay. Alrighty. And we can join all these together. We can go Shift I and imprint that on there. We can mirror our guy across, getting rid of our temporary plane. And Booleaning it. And here you can see what I was talking about with the lack of symmetry. So at this stage, we can't do any more mirrors. Okay, so we're just going to have to bring this one across. Okay, because we didn't have symmetry on those. And we'll just mirror that onto there. Okay, so we got these two here. And we can just really bring that in like that on both sides. And that could be some extra details going in there. Who knows? Some buttons maybe. Some sci-fi buttons. We won't go too far into detailing on this video because that's for another day. I don't want this to go on forever. It's already at 47 minutes. So one last thing. In Plasticity you can open a new window by going up to P, New Window. And I've got these screws that I made. So we're going to add those on as extra detail. So we can do the Control Shift C from here. Okay. And this is the screw kit bash kit. It's actually available on my Gumroad for sale. But we just want to add some extra screw details in here. So I'm just going to choose one that I think fits on a fire hydrant. I think something simple actually, like something like this Y-shaped one. And then we come into here, Control Shift C, and then Control Shift V. And that should work. We can make that much bigger. Okay, and that's actually on that face. So what we can do now is each time we hit go, it's just going to make another one in the same size that we previously had. So I might stick one there. I might just stick some around the bottom first. Okay. We can use this to rotate them. And I don't really care about the placement because this is going to give it a little bit of, I don't know, randomness. Like, you know, these old fire hydrants weren't necessarily made with exact measurements. It would have been fairly exact. But if the guy put the drill in the wrong place to make the hole by a couple of millimeters, they weren't going to start again necessarily, right? It was just to hold it together. So I'm just giving a little bit of randomness by pulling these around and giving it some circular motion. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to hit escape and we've got this one here and we're going to, first of all, let's just boolean these ones out. Hopefully that worked. Pressing 1, Q, W, and that worked. Just making sure we haven't pulled any of those other bolts out. So now we've got these little details. Okay, and let's radial array this one around here and mirror it on the Y. Select this object and press Q, making sure we don't select the top object at the same time. And there we have it. We've got all of these bolts around here, and this will show up in our normal map. Now what we want to do very quickly, and it's not quick, you're going to have to select all of these rings one by one. So I might speed this bit up. Okay. So I can give those actually a nice big fillet, G2 or possibly caudal. Okay, and then finally we want to give our bolts from our low poly a little bit of extra detail. So we can just really and this will add detail. This is what we've got, and like I said before, it still doesn't look amazing because that's not part of the process of making a game asset. But I think we've got enough detail on here now to go and move over to Blender. So in Plasticity, we should have our high poly, okay, with a little bit of extra detail here and there. And if we switch that off, we'll move our bolts from our high poly into our actual high poly folder. Okay, and then we should also have our low poly, which is just the silhouette, if you remember. So let's collapse these groups. Low poly, high poly, right? And you'll notice the silhouette doesn't differ too much between the two. So if I just turn the black silhouette on, there's only going to be very marginal differences between the low poly and the high poly. There's a little bit of an extra curvature here, okay, but that'll be baked into the details. And what we might actually do, just viewing that now, is we might try to blend that somehow. And we need to join these two together once again. Okay, so this is what you just want to do, your final little checks. And maybe just on this one. Or maybe just making it even closer and something like that. I think that'll look really nice on the normal map. Okay. Alright, so if we look at the two silhouettes now, we've got our high poly and our low poly. So that's a little bit of a difference in the silhouette, but I think it's going to be okay in terms of normal map. Okay, so let's take these both into Blender. I'm going to use the Blender bridge. Okay, I'm not going to show you how to use the Blender bridge. I already have a video about that on my channel. Okay, and let's go. So in Blender, I'm going to navigate over to my Plasticity tab and I'm going to connect it. I'm just going to ensure that in Plasticity, both my high poly and low poly are visible. Okay, and we're going to delete our curves now. I'm just going to delete all of our curves. So we've got our low poly and our high poly visible. There's a fair amount of objects. And with the low poly, I actually want to, let's just delete the high poly for a second. I actually want to make these all joined. Okay, this is going to reduce geometry because it's going to make sure that the underside face of these bolts are not necessarily creating extra faces. Okay, with the high poly, it doesn't matter too much. Okay, so we're going to make sure that they're both visible, and then we're going to head back over to Blender and we're going to go refresh. Okay, they're both showing up inside here. I'm going to select everything. I'm going to come down to this refacet tab. You can go tris or n-gons, and I'm going to refresh this as n-gons. Okay, and the reason is that makes things a little bit easier to deal with later on. Okay, and they're all stuck inside this Plasticity folder. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to deal with one at a time. So let's deal with our low poly first and foremost. Okay, so we've got this here. Okay, and if we go up here, sorry, to here, and we stick on wireframe, you can see that that's still a triangulated wireframe. So let's actually make sure we are refaceting everything. Hit refacet. Oh, yep, there we go. Refacet. Angons, okay? So if we look at our high poly or our low poly, that's all angons, and you can see that it hasn't created a whole lot of geometry. Okay, I think it's the perfect amount actually. And if we look at our high poly, it's also not created that much geometry. We could actually reduce this down and just select all of this stuff here, and we can go refacet. You might get a little bit more detail out of it, but that's okay. All right. And so they match in their silhouette. I'm going to turn wireframe off for a second. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. Okay. All right. That's our high poly and our low poly. Okay, so UV maps. Now, with this object, I mean, you can spend time on UVing. There's a lot of ways to UV. You can do things like, you know, select all the sharp edges, or you can do a smart UV unwrap. So if we go into edge mode and go select sharp edges, you can then right click, mark those as a seam, right? And then mark some other seams where you think you might need them, like here, here, and coming towards here. All right, and that looks like it's going to unwrap most things. All right. So you could then try and unwrap that. So you could go unwrap minimum stretch, and you're going to get something like that. You could do an UV smart project. Okay, at, you know, just default settings. Island margin, you might want to go 0.003. Okay, you can unwrap that, and you can get maybe a little bit better results with a smart UV unwrap. You could spend time on your UVs making sure that they're perfect, right? Or you could do something like, if you've got access to it, you could use another app like Rezom. Okay, so I've got the Rezom bridge here. So Rezom's another app. And if you set up your settings right, you can just hit automatic, right? Rezom's going to open up. Okay, it might not work properly, or it might do a really good job. Okay, and that looks actually pretty good in terms of what's actually there. I think that's great. And then you can do things like, you know, obviously this is the base here. You don't necessarily want that to be as big. So you could take that off, select everything else, and then you can then use the UV packer in Blender, right? Like UV pack islands, right? Pack, and it's just going to pack everything with, or you could use something like UV Pack Master, which is the, you know, the sort of the god. You can check all of these ones, and you could go pack. All right, it's going to think about it. If you want it to think about it longer, you can turn on heuristic search, and you can go pack, right? And it's going to deal with it like that. And you can hit pack to others, or actually take that base off, and we want to hit pack to others, and then that's just going to find a nice little spot for that. So I think I'm going to stick with this UV map, to be honest. It doesn't really matter for this project, but if you do want not to be able to see seams and things like that, you want to spend a little bit more time on your UVs. This isn't a UV tutorial, just showing you what's possible. Okay, so now we've got our UVs for that. Okay, we want it to be triangulated, so you could just add a triangulate modifier. Okay, and we could turn our wireframe on, right? And then you want to add a decimate modifier, right? And you want to reduce that. But that starts to cause some shading issues, as you can see. So I actually made a plugin for this a couple of years ago. It's still selling quite well on the Blender Market and Gumroad, but this does a few things that you can do manually, but I can just click on this and I want to move it into a new collection. Okay, no, I want to move it into the scene collection first. Okay, and then I can just hit this button, make low poly, right? And you'll notice not a lot changed. Okay, that's because I'm making a duplicate of the original and then I'm transferring the normal data back with a modifier stack. If you had to do this in some circumstances with every single object in your scene, okay, you'd have a lot of problems. You can see that the decimate hits to 35 degrees. If we go into workspace mode, it turns on a wireframe and you can see what the wireframe is here. Okay, so we can actually hit D on our keyboard and we can just play around with it until we've got the correct. We're not getting too many shading artifacts, and I think that looks quite nice. So we can go out of workspace mode and we've got this, and this is a low poly and it's only got 2000 faces. Okay, so without the decimate modifier included, it has 7,800 faces, so almost 8,000 faces, a lot more. If we turn this off, it looks like junk. So this is just a really quick way to get you know, your low poly model. We've already got our UVs, but there are some tools for making the UVs, and under the experimental features you can do a one-click low poly as well, which for some assets is going to work. For other stuff you're going to want to spend a bit more time on it. Okay, so with our high poly we also need that to be a and we want to give this a name. Okay, so under here we can just give this a name. We can call it hydrant and we can rename it, and then it's got that hydrant underscore low. Okay, if it doesn't have the low poly suffix you can hit the button to give it the low poly suffix. Okay, and then we want to take our high poly, and that's been refaceted as well. We want to turn off our low poly momentarily, and we do actually want to join all of these objects together as well. So I'm just going to go on this and I'm going to hit Control J, and we're going to call this hydrant, and then we're going to click the Make High Poly button. Okay, and it should look exactly the same, but when we go into workspace mode we can see that it is fully triangulated now, and it's using the same face corner data as the original. So that's our low poly and our high poly. Okay, we'll just check that they've got the right names. That's hydrant underscore high and that's hydrant underscore low. Okay, so we can go out, we can select both of these models, just ensure that they're all connected. Okay, and we can go Q, and we want to go, we want to go to File, Export, FBX with both of them selected, selected objects only. All right, we want to put this in a file. Okay, we're going to call this bakes, hydrant bakes. We're going to export we'll just copy our folder name, export our FBX. Okay, I'm going to close Plasticity right now to save a little bit of RAM, and we're going to open Marmoset Tool Bag 5. So here I am in Marmoset Tool Bag. If my voice sounds different, it's because I'm recording this a little bit later on after my dinner. You don't need to use Marmoset Tool Bag for baking your, your normal and ambient occlusion maps. But for me, I find it's the most intuitive of all the different options. There's some options in Blender that you can do it, Substance Painter. But for me, Marmoset for these kind of props is the best place to go. So what we're going to do, you're in this, we're going to go into this texture panel here. Okay, we're going to come up here and we're going to hit the New Bake Project. And that's going to bring a baker into the scene. And it's called Bake Project 1. You can rename this if you want. We can call it Hydrant. Okay. And under this, we're going to go to the quick loader, right? And because we gave in Blender, right? If we go back to Blender, because we gave these the names with the underscore high and underscore low suffix, Marmoset is going to recognize that. So we're going to open that up and we'll see what looks like to be just the low poly with all of its hard edges. But if we open up this folder, we'll see that there's a high one that's been hidden under this eyeball. So we can turn that on and we can turn that off. Okay, we can see what's going on here. Now, there's a few different modes for viewing in Marmoset, and we want to change from raster to ray tracing. And the reason we want to do that right now at this moment is because we need ray tracing to be able to visualize the bevel shader that we're going to use to bake in our bevels on our sharp edges. So under surface, it says normals here. We're on our high poly material, and we're just going to change this to bevel. We're going to take the bevel samples, we're going to chuck them all the way up. We're just going to give this a new color, okay, so it's a little bit easier to visualize. Okay, we can up the bevel width, and as you can see here, right there, we're getting a bevel where previously, actually we can just bring it down like that, it was a sharp edge. And the great thing about this is that if we put our wireframe on, we're not getting any extra geometry. That is a sharp edge. And if we come back to Blender and we turn off our low poly, we can see that our high poly, because of all of these little chamfers like that have so much high detail that would not ride in a game engine, right? Necessarily. Even in things like nanite, you want to avoid this because it's 242,000 triangles. And if we compare that to our low hydrant, which when optimized is 2,600. So it's like a factor of, was that 100? Yeah, it's a factor of 100 less. Like, you know, it's divided by 100. So we really want to keep this low. And as you can see, we're keeping that low poly, but we're getting all of these extra details. Now, I don't want my bevels to be quite that. And we can mess with the angle a little bit. We can make it over 90 or under 90, but I think that's okay, right? It's quite uniform, this bevel. It's all the way over, okay? But when we go back to our low poly, okay, nothing's happened. So first of all, we want to click on this low poly object, and we want to make sure that our cage, which has been automatically generated from our low poly mesh, is okay. And you can actually just hit estimate offset, right? And you can also hit paint offset. And if there's any bits that you think are too far out or anything like that, you can actually just take this and paint them in. So I actually think in this case it doesn't matter too much. I think this is going to be a great bake, but we'll find out. Okay, so what we're going to do is we'll go back to our bake project. We'll go preview material. It's going to say baker output path doesn't exist. I've already done a practice run, so we're just going to save that there. Okay, and then we can hit bake. We turn our, actually I think it's already done it. It's already baked. It's baking one map, just the normal map. Okay, now we want to do our, we want to configure this, and we want a few more maps. So we want, you might want an array of maps. We want our ambient occlusion turned on and our cavity turned on, and we also want to get our curvature. Okay, we'll have that turned on as well. Okay, so we'll just wait for that to finish, and we'll come back up here and we'll hit preview, and we're getting a lot more. We can go onto our default map, and let's come down to occlusion, click on that, and we can open our cavity map as well, just to get a little bit of extra depth in there. Right, I think that looks great. Okay, there's a lot of things that we could do. We could paint this or whatever, but let's just slap a texture on and see how it looks. So what we want to do is we want to make a texture project like this. Okay, and over here we've got our default material selected, you can actually click this to link the material, and it links all of the maps. It actually automatically generates the curvature, so I would bring in the baked curvature in any case. Not that we're necessarily going to use that in this tutorial. And then we can go back to the render mode, and just because ray tracing can be quite heavy, we can change to hybrid. Okay, we're still getting some of the ray tracing effects, but not all of them. And let's slap on a metal material. Okay, we can just make this a little bit bigger momentarily. And I quite like this one, so we're going to go to Layers, Texture Project 1, and just drag that in there. Okay, we can change the color of this. I think a nice yellow color can be quite nice there. I'm going to start playing around with it too much. All right, we've got this nice orange color. We can add a fill layer. Okay, we can come down to our smart masks. We can just use this directional dirt kind of one. Okay, and we can just add a material into the material slot of that. So if we come back up to our materials and just type in dirt, we can just whack this dirt in there. Whoopsie, that's in the wrong slot. Add it into the material slot. Okay, and we've got this dirt here. We can mess around with it. We can come into the fill layer, and you can mess around with the different aspects of this here as well. And we can also bring the opacity down of this to some degree, and there we have it. We can make it also a darker color. Alright, so I think that looks really great. So there you have it. That's, you know, my pipeline, or part of one of my pipelines for making props in Plasticity. Okay, so and then obviously optimizing and texturing them. I think with a little bit more work, you know, just painting some of these screws and maybe putting some more details on here, we've got something that we can easily chuck in a game. There's other little things that you can do, like if we go to the baker and we just turn everything off except for ambient occlusion, right? We can give it floor occlusion, right? And that's going to like give you some kind of like upwards occlusion. Might not be able to see it too much in this particular instance. So there you have it, game ready asset, starting in Plasticity, finishing in Marmoset, but you could have finished in Blender or Substance or anywhere else. It's low poly and it's ready to go. A little bit more painting, you know, we didn't put a lot of effort into that, but a little bit more painting and this would be ready to go. It's got all of its bevels baked in and everything else. So don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, go check out my buddy Matt's channel, learn everything about design, and don't forget I'm a Plasticity affiliate, so you can use the code REFUGE10 to get a 10% discount at checkout. And I'll see you guys all in the next one. Tschüss!